Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on this podcast like we always do. His name is David Fite. He has a lot of campaigning experience. He's going to share with us some of his experience, and he might give us some opportunities and some ideas on how to campaign better. So welcome to the podcast, David.
Thanks so much for having me.
David, if we can get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
I'm 26 from upstate New York. I got into politics because of Gary Johnson's presidential campaign in 2016 mostly, and then Larry Sharpe really brought me into it with his gubernatorial race here in New York in 2018, and I started volunteering on his campaign and then got talked into running for New York City Council in 2019, where I got 3.2% of the vote.
Wow.
And actually the week after my election in New York City, I was in New Hampshire working for Tulsi Gabbard's presidential primary bid. I was already volunteering for her during my campaign a little bit, kind of doing some joint events and things like that. And she brought me up to New Hampshire pretty much as soon as I was done with my race, and have been campaigning pretty much since. I've worked in 26 different states for 4 different parties at this point, just going around the different states, talking to people about what's important to them and what's on their mind, and getting to spread a little bit of liberty into their minds every day. It's been fun.
Excellent. There's a lot in your introduction that we can talk about, so I look forward to discussing all this. One thing that sticks out to me is you mentioned you work with 4 different parties. So kindly tell us what requirements you have for you to work for. So I take it you wouldn't work for anybody. You wouldn't work for Donald Trump or George Bush, but you will work for some other people. So kindly explain how you vet potential opportunities. What framework you use.
Yeah, definitely. I will admit there have been points in my career where it has been a little bit more about just the next job and whether or not they're going to pay me well, a little bit less than their actual merits, because I was in a tough financial spot. So I actually I did work for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Trump, I got kind of swindled into it. I agreed to work for Nancy Mace, who I actually do like, in South Carolina for Congress, and it turned out to be we were working for the whole slate. So I was also campaigning for Trump and Lindsey Graham, and I found another job as quickly as I could and got out of that situation, because I do not support either of those gentlemen. But when I'm really looking at somebody, the main thing for me is whether or not they're going to try to further divide the country and the political spectrum, and if they're going to try to use whatever political power they get if they win to force their views onto other people, or if they're going to use that to represent the people that elected them. That was my biggest thing that brought me onto Tulsi Gabbard's campaign, was that she's voted against her own beliefs in Congress a few times because her constituents in Hawaii really vilified her and told her to vote a specific way, and she represented them even though it went against what she personally believed. And I think that's what a politician should be like.
Interesting. So where do you draw the line between that and somebody pandering to voters and voting just to get the popularity of it? So how do you balance principled voting versus not forcing your views on others?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think that it has to still align with what you claim your principles are. For me, it's all about consistency. And
okay.
if you like to speak on Tulsi more, like if you're talking like that and you're campaigning as if you're going to be a representative and you're campaigning as if you're going to listen to your constituents, then I want to see you actually listen to your constituents. If you're campaigning that you're going to, change all of these things and, drain the swamp or, all of these other promises about your personal, like, views and what you want to do with those, and then you go and just vote the way that everybody wants you to anyway, then then you're lying, then you're pandering, and that's hypocrisy. But if you're really going into it and you're selling your constituents on being a good representative, that you will listen and you don't have your mind super made up on any of these issues and you're willing to like hear out smarter people on these topics, then I think sticking with that and continuing in that isn't like being wishy-washy or pandering. It's just, keeping your promises.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. So what would you say the differences are for running campaigns for alternative parties versus running campaigns for the major parties, or are they similar?
Ooh, they are not similar at all. The biggest difference is the Democratic Party has one software suite, series of different like programs and sites that they use that are all developed by the same company, that has every single bit of voter data from every Democratic campaign for the last couple of decades, if not more, all in one place. They have all of their walk lists, all of their call lists, all of their email lists, all of their donations. Everything is in one beautiful system that if you're running a Democratic campaign, you do have to pay, I believe, to get access to it, but you can get access to it. And it's getting refined and tweaked and more information getting put into it with each and every single campaign that happens. So they actually have good, amazing, like fairly accurate data to start out with. When I'm knocking doors for the Democratic Party, I'm not knocking on dead people's doors or like walking up to abandoned houses or sometimes torn down houses like I am when the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party give me a walk list. The Republican Party is better than any of the third parties I've worked for. Their systems are better, but because they're a little bit more, let's say, free market driven, they have a couple of competing softwares that, as far as, the free market capitalist in me, I like that. It does provide some competition and keeps them honest, but in reality, it makes it a worse product because not everyone is using it, and new apps are kind of coming up, and old companies are kind of dying off, and there's a little bit of a turnover in this. There's like 2 or 3 major apps that people use for the Republican side of things, but it's still significantly less accurate because it's not as like all-inclusive like the Democrats are, where they have everything. And then you get into a third party where if I'm knocking doors for like a Libertarian or a Green candidate or something like that, most of the time they don't even have a walk list to give me. They definitely don't have an app built out for it. Sometimes it's like a spreadsheet that's like printed out that I have to like check off as I knock on the doors. And sometimes it's just walk down this road and knock on every door and hope you have good conversations. And there's like very, very little data behind it. So for me, the biggest difference between minor parties and major parties is the technology behind it, whether it's the like door knocking software or the fundraising softwares. We are tens of thousands of miles behind the 2 major parties on this.
Oh no, stuff. That's not surprising, of course, given the financial gap. So it makes me wonder if alternative parties can seize on the systemization that occurs in the Democratic Party mostly, and you said to a lesser extent the Republican Party, that could move them forward, you think?
Yes, definitely. I know the Libertarian Party is working on getting a much better CRM system and data management system to somewhat do what the Democrats are doing. I know that that's in the works. I know that there are a couple of the kind of like independent campaigns out there that are doing similar things where they're kind of trying to build the infrastructure along with their campaign that can be used for future campaigns. I know Forward Party's also working on stuff like this. And actually Lars Mapstead, who's running for president right now, is trying to tackle the fundraising side of things. So the Democrats have Act Blue, which is every donation that goes to any Democratic campaign or most of your progressive like PACs and social causes as well. So, Planned Parenthood, BLM, all of those things. It's every single dollar of that is going through one fundraising source called Act Blue. And so Lars is actually building a Vote Gold alternative to that libertarians and liberty-minded organizations would be able to use so that we can lower the overhead costs on fundraising and kind of bring that all in-house and actually compete with that. So there's stuff in the works that gets me excited. And yeah, if we can actually compete on a technological scale, we would be good. And the thing is, we should be able to compete on a technological scale. Whatever minor party you're in, whether it's the Greens or the Forward or the Libertarian, you're in a party full of younger people, mostly, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of tech people. We should be able to compete with these 70, 80-year-old dinosaurs that are running the other two major parties. We just don't have the coordination and cooperation to really get there yet.
So it's more a matter of, like you say, coordination and cooperation rather than financial limitations, because you can probably get one of the CRM systems for not that much, right, in the grand scheme?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a lot for a person. Those kinds of numbers would be a lot to you or me, but things like groups like the Forward Party could easily build out something like NGP, what the Democrats use, and do it at fairly low cost too, because they have some of the most brilliant tech minds in the country already in their space. The main problem is the competition amongst all of the independents and minor parties, and the fact that we're basically having to reinvent the wheel every time somebody decides to run. Like Andrew Yang, when he was running, or even when he was making the Forward Party, had no help, no kind of guidebook, no 60 to 100 years of infrastructure to be able to build off of like the other two parties have. And eventually Yang's going to run out of steam, like, say, Ross Perot did, and then there's going to be somebody else, and then there's going to be somebody else. But until we get a system and like one decent party or organization that can keep this infrastructure and these resources going from campaign to campaign, we'll just keep having to start from square one every 4 years.
Oh no. Yeah, that's not ideal at all. So what would you say the differences are between, say, a presidential campaign and another race, maybe for legislator or for Senate? What would you say the differences are for those, since sounds like you've done a variety?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've worked everything from, a small town board race all the way up to a couple of presidentials. So, and there's a lot of similarities between the way that most people run those campaigns.
Oh.
And because the problem is, even if I'm knocking on somebody's door to talk about, let's say, state senate or state house, that's something I've worked probably the most of. This is exclusively state issues, right? They're a legislative person. They have one say in a room of 200 people about only issues that pertain to your state. But somebody in Michigan is going to ask me, well, what do they think about the border wall? Well, it doesn't matter what they think about the border wall, but I still have to answer that question anyway. And because of this like hyper nationalization of politics in society, we're seeing, I've been seeing this more and more over the last few years, and to the point where almost every conversation I have at a door ends up turning to some sort of a national topic that is completely meaningless to the conversation I'm actually trying to have with them, because I need to talk about Michigan issues while I'm working a Michigan state house race and talking to this Michigan voter, and they want to talk about like immigration or the FBI or something else that either Trump or Biden made national news at the time. And all of these smaller races are having to, even if they don't want to, even if they want to talk about local issues, they can't, because the voters don't want them to. The voters want to know, what do you, like, how do you feel about January 6th? How do you feel about Obamacare? You know, it's all of these like hyper nationalized issues. But I've seen a flicker of hope this year with the really local elections that are happening right now. Mostly it's like county and town kind of level elections happening this year. And I've seen a lot of people like on both sides of the aisle, all over the political spectrum, really try to fight back against that and really push for a more localized focus, and that's exciting. I hope that it's positive and that it actually works, and that people are able to care more about their local politics, because that's, you know, in my opinion, the most important type of politics. But as far as actually, you know, the campaigning side of things, which is what you were really asking, the biggest difference for me in scaling a campaign is how much face time you're actually going to be able to get with each and every voter. So if I'm working a presidential campaign, I need to get votes with tweets and with ads and with you know, like sponsored things, and with podcast interviews, and with, you know, parades where they're just like, all you're getting from the candidate is a little wave as they drive by you, but you saw the sign, you heard somebody like chanting something that sounded interesting, and then you went on our website, you got hooked, and then you're going to vote for us. I don't have time to get my candidate in front of all 330 million voters in the country. And I really need to heavily rely on word of mouth and like getting organic traction from other people. And so that makes for a different focus in how you're reaching the people that you can get FaceTime with, because you have to focus that FaceTime on firing them up to go talk about you to somebody else, not just maybe come back to the next event and bring a friend or something like that, which for a town board race, you can really try to get in front of each and every person in your town and have a real conversation with them. But you just really can't with the bigger scale politics. So you have to, even if you only have a 5-minute conversation with somebody, you have to be able to, in that 5 minutes, give them something that's going to make them go talk about you at their dinner table or at their place of work or something like that, to actually multiply that. And that has to be a major focus.
Sure. So since you've worked on a lot of these campaigns, can you tell us, both from the position of leader and follower, what leadership lessons have you learned that our audience can use in their campaigns?
Ooh, leadership lessons. That's a great one. I got into like working on campaigns after a career in kind of middle management in the finance and sales sector. So I got very quickly thrust into volunteer coordinator positions, because that's what they thought I would be good at, because that makes sense. I'm good at managing a team of people. But I found very quickly that I'm terrible at managing a team of volunteers, because there's no actual like hard line commitment from a volunteer like there is from an employee. Like there's no threat, there's no payment, there's no you could get fired if you don't do what I say. There's no like the social structure is completely different when you're talking to a volunteer versus when you're talking to an employee. And you have to be a lot nicer, a lot more reassuring. but also a little bit more forward and kind of demanding, because it's not just something that's in a job description that they signed on to. They have to be constantly kind of kept up with and given new tasks and told what to do, because most of these people are just, hey, I want to help. Whatever you need me to do, just give me something to do. And they're desperate for a task, but you have to be very direct in how you're giving them that task, but then you have to be really understanding if, life happened and they were really free for the first 2 days of the week when they asked you to volunteer, and then the rest of their week went to hell and, something happened with their kid or something else. You can't get mad at them. You can't, you can't treat them like a bad employee. You have to be understanding. And it's a very different dynamic that I had to learn very quickly. And I've gotten better at volunteer management since then, but at the beginning I was very, very, very bad. So one big thing for me is, you can't treat people like employees, but you have to still treat them like a vital, active member of a team that is being, talked to on at least a daily basis. You wouldn't expect, I know remote work is becoming like a really popular thing nowadays, but you would never expect an employee to be able to go 2 or 3 weeks without ever coming into the office and actually get their work done normally, but these people will let state coordinators just kind of like go on their campaigns for weeks at a time without a real check-in or a real update. And I don't mean everybody just kind of sitting around a single Zoom call, giving a real quick 2-minute update. I mean a one-on-one call with someone that's above them. It doesn't have to be the campaign manager or the volunteer coordinator. You can delegate if you have a big team, but you need a 5-minute phone call from somebody above them at least once a week to like really keep them engaged. And really try to have as much communication as possible amongst your team. If they are building real like connections and friendships, then their commitment to the cause will get a lot stronger. If it's not just about disappointing the candidate, but it's also about disappointing like everyone around them that they've made friends with and that they like, then they're going to be 10 times more likely to actually do the thing that they are being asked to do. And so if you can build that kind of, that super cliche, like corporate, like we're all a family kind of structure in your campaigns, it will actually go really far in my experience.
Sure. So what would you say, if there is any, what are the common denominators for successful campaigns versus campaigns that are not successful?
So I'll be honest, my track record on working for successful campaigns isn't the best because I'm a libertarian and an anarchist, and I work for campaigns that are usually fairly anti-establishment. But as far as, I'll kind of quantify your question where success doesn't actually necessarily mean winning, but just, achieving the goal of the campaign, because that is hit or miss, even with amongst third-party campaigns. A lot of people go into it like, I want 2% and to bring 1,000 more people into the party, a reasonable goal, and they can't even hit that. And I think for me, the biggest common denominator amongst unsuccessful campaigns is candidates who try to do too much of the campaign team structure. I actually just had an interview on my show a couple weeks ago with a campaign manager, and he put it really nicely that the only job of a candidate should be to ask for votes and ask for money. That is all they should be doing. If they're not asking for votes or asking for money, they're driving somewhere so that they can ask for votes and ask for money. They shouldn't be the treasurer. They shouldn't be the campaign manager. They shouldn't be running the social media full time. They shouldn't be any other of those major roles in the campaign. You need a full team. Otherwise, you will get burnt out very quickly. Which brings me to my second biggest common denominator is that you need to have a sustainable life set up for you at the beginning of the campaign. This is a dig on myself with my city council campaign as well. I quit my job to run for city council full time under the illusion that my friends and family and supporters and whatnot would be able to kind of keep me alive while I was running for office. And they kept me alive, but not right? I wasn't living comfortably. I was struggling. I was missing meals. I was, doing random DoorDash or Instacart or something like that to try to make a couple bucks instead of campaigning. And getting fairly down in the dumps about the situation and wasting a bunch of time being mad at myself. And, this isn't just my campaign. I've watched this with a bunch of other ones as well, where a candidate will be really gung-ho about their race, and they will go and they will campaign 50, 60 hours a week for a month and a half, and then life will happen, and they will have to go back to their actual life for a little bit, and it's so much more difficult to jump back into campaigning after that happens. Where if you take real account of what your situation is, say I can reasonably give 30 hours a week to campaigning and 20 hours a week to this other thing to pay the bills, and still have enough time for my family and whatnot, then go for it and do those 30 hours. And you can be consistent with those 30 hours for an entire 9-month campaign, and people will see you being consistent. But if you're popping up randomly here and there, and then if they're going onto your personal Facebook, you're running a GoFundMe to pay your rent, nobody wants to vote for somebody like that. They want to see that you can have your shit together before you try to get your town or your state shit together. And so I definitely think that if you don't have a stable life, you should not try to run for office.
Huh, that's interesting. There's a conservative guy who does some campaign training. I've listened to he had a podcast and he also had training. I haven't found too much in our area. There is Leading Liberty that has campaign training stuff for Liberty candidates. So one thing this guy, I believe, if I remember correctly, his name is Raj Schaefer, and he says one of the biggest things he advises candidates is to make sure their family is on board with their campaign. If they're married, their husband or wife supports their campaign. From your experience, is that good advice, or how would you advise someone in that regard?
Yes, 100%. That is some of some crucial advice. I have watched quite a few campaigns get tanked because the spouse hated it.
No.
And that doesn't mean that your spouse has to be super political or want to go to a bunch of events or anything like that, but they have to be supportive and thinking of it positively from the get-go. Otherwise, yeah, definitely do not do it, because no amount of votes or political power or exposure for your ideals or whatever it is that you're running for, none of that is worth your marriage or your relationship with your kids. That stuff is so much more important. So if you're going to ruin your marriage by running for office, then definitely do not do that, because you'll be able to see that as a voter too. If I'm going to a campaign event and I can see the spouse is there, but I can see that she absolutely does not want to be there, that I take note of that, and most people will, even if they're not hyper political or trying to analyze it, they'll take note that this is an unhappy marriage. This is somebody who cannot please their spouse and keep them happy. How are they going to please their constituents and keep them happy? It's something that's going to go through somebody's mind, even if it's subconscious. So you need your spouse there, happy, energetic, enthused, or at least, there sometimes, at least in pictures on your social media or something like that. You need to be able to show that you have a healthy relationship for sure.
Sounds good. That Leading Liberty guy that I mentioned, he also says something about campaigns, which I think is interestingly reassuring. He says most people have stuff they said or did in the past that are not the best, yet he believes in most circumstances it shouldn't be a death sentence for a campaign, yet a person should be ready to speak on behalf and explain it and do it in the right way. So can you speak to how candidates need to handle their past experiences, whether they made mistakes that were terrible mistakes or minor mistakes, especially in the rise of cancel culture today? Stuff gets out very easily. So can you speak to that in your experience from having to manage candidates past and how people listening to this podcast, how they can learn from that when they run their campaigns?
Yeah, for sure. That is the first conversation I'll say second conversation that a candidate and campaign manager need to have. As soon as they agree that the campaign exists and that what they're running for, and that initial conversation, the very next conversation needs to be a detailed dig through. Your campaign manager needs to know every single thing. You cannot lie in this conversation. You cannot hide anything. No white lies, no half truths, no nothing. They need to know exactly what happened, exactly how it can be perceived, exactly what the other person is saying about it. They need to know everything, and then they need to know how to handle it. And you can, if it's already a public enough thing, if it is absolutely 100% guaranteed that it is going to get out and be a major talking point of the campaign, you can always try to get ahead of it, try to organize. This is going to sound really pandery and political, but you can specifically try to target outreach and kind of volunteer efforts and things like that in the early stages of the campaign that kind of counterbalance whatever bad thing it is that you did. If you've got a couple of petty larceny charges from when you're a teenager from convenience stores, you can, campaign towards small businesses and do some sort of a small business renovation thing where all your volunteers go out and wash the windows of a bunch of convenience stores. It's little kind of things like that can kind of try to counterbalance it and get out ahead of it. Otherwise, leave it alone. Don't talk about it unless you're asked about it. You definitely don't want to just out yourself at the beginning of your campaign. I've seen a couple of people do that where it's well, now that I'm running for office, everybody's gonna know. And the second interview they do, they just talk about all of the terrible things that they've done in their past, and now they just sound like a bad person because that was half of the interview was just all the bad things that they've done. So definitely don't do that. But you need to be able to talk about it. You need to have an answer for each and every question, prepped and ready to go. You cannot dodge it. You can't. I was actually watching a debate the other day where someone was asked about criminal convictions from just a few years ago, fraud convictions too. Definitely, regardless of where you stand on the anarchist spectrum, it's a NAP violation. He's doing actual bad things and convicted of it. And his response was, well, I would need to know ahead of time that I was going to be asked those questions, so I'm not going to answer it. And just completely dodged the question and lost every single person that was watching that debate, which was a couple hundred people in a clubhouse room. And so you cannot ever do something like that. You have to have an answer for it, even if it's short and, I don't like to talk about it too much, but here's a little thing. You can say that you're not talking about it, but you still have to talk about it a little bit and give an answer. Otherwise, every reporter or whoever's asking you, if you don't answer, they're going to dig further. They're going to answer it for themselves, and then they're going to go telling the worst possible version of the question that you didn't answer.
So would you say that's more of an issue in the bigger races versus the smaller races, or does it also come up in the smaller races like county board would you say?
So actually, I genuinely think in today's political climate, some of this matters more in the smaller races because the smaller races are more genuine and like more real. So you'll actually lose a voter for town board with some like if you cheated on your wife or something like that, that'll lose a lot of people on some like small town like town board race where like Trump said, he could have gone onto Fifth Avenue, shot someone dead in the street, and not lost a single vote. And I genuinely believe that he was completely correct when he said that. When you get into the statewide races or the national races, there's so much like WWE wrestler superstar style like thing about the candidates that most people are so polarized in those races that Herschel Walker in Georgia in 22 is a great example. He didn't end up losing, but not by a whole lot. When running as a Republican, being anti-abortion and like all about the nuclear family, it came out that he had both paid for a whole bunch of abortions and had a whole bunch of kids, like bastard kids out there, like out of wedlock that he never talks to and is just a complete deadbeat dad. And like everything he's campaigning on is complete hypocrisy and BS, still pulled 46% of the vote in the state of Georgia because, well, we can't vote for a Democrat. That would be so much worse. I'd rather vote, there were a bunch of Christian conservatives in Georgia that would rather vote for a deadbeat dad and someone who has paid for multiple abortions than for an actual reverend who just supports the right to have one. When you get up to that level, a lot of those things just end up not really mattering in the long run. I'm sure DeSantis is going to have a whole bunch of stuff come up about him. It's not going to do anything to his reputation.
So here's a question. Sometimes when people are successful, like Jesse Ventura, he was known for being outspoken and no holds barred in his speech. So I take it you wouldn't necessarily advise that in most campaigns, but how do you balance where you don't want someone to be a typical politician where they're not real, they're too diplomatic. So how do you do that? So first of all, would you be okay with somebody that would be outspoken to a degree? Some people find it refreshing, so it could be good. So how would you feel about a candidate that would do something like that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I am a huge fan of Jesse Ventura, both like when his old career in politics and what he's doing now and stuff. I would love to see him run another campaign. I think honestly that goes back to sort of my other answer about consistency and just maintaining whatever it is that you think that you are. Set a brand, set a style of campaign early on and stick with it. I also work for and have worked for in the past Spike Cohen, who is kind of crazy and very much out there. Having campaigned with Vermin Supreme during the primary, and then everything that he did with Joe Jorgensen, and now with You Are the Power. He's all over the place, way out there, kind of extremely like dark sense of humor, and is completely unapologetically himself. And I think that is killer for him. Like he does it really well. He can still wear a suit and look professional and still make sure that it's not all a joke, but most of it's a joke and most of it's having fun and most of it's just like being a positive energy. And that brand works really well for him. And then there's other people where that brand wouldn't work for, and when they try, it just comes out clunky. If you aren't a really confident, outspoken person, don't try to run a Jesse Ventura kind of campaign. That would be what I would say. Is if you're trying to be more than you are, that will come off as disingenuous. And same vice versa. If you are Jesse Ventura or Spike Cohen, you can't run a Mitt Romney campaign, right? It would break your absolute soul to just be that polished and professional, and that will also shine through. People will be able to tell. So if you have the charisma to pull it off, go for it. It's a super positive energy, and I do agree that a lot of people are finding it very refreshing to hear somebody who is just, shooting from the hip and not really worrying too much about how they come across all the time, and just being unapologetically themselves. I do think that I can say with Spike, a lot of Spike is Spike completely original off the top of his head, but there is a team behind him that helps, and there is somebody that says, hey, Spike, don't fucking say that, that's crazy. If he's about to cross the line, there are, and I don't know Jesse's team well enough to know, but I'm sure there was somebody on his campaign similar that could pull the reins in if you cross the line. And I think that's a good thing to have if you're going to try to run a campaign like that. Have one kind of doom and gloom naysayer that you can listen to that'll make sure that you don't cross the line, because if you're trying to actually win the race, if you're trying to run and actually win, you are going to need that socially conservative, politically ambiguous Gen X, older millennial voting bloc that will like that. A lot of them will like the kind of Ventura thing. That voting bloc went heavily for Trump in 2016, but if you cross the line, you'll lose it, which is, I think, why Trump lost in 2020.
That's good advice. That's thoughtful and nuanced, so that's very good. I take it our audience will appreciate that. You mentioned having the importance of having someone on your team that may veto things or tell you not to do something. That seems to work with other leadership advice. People often say you want to have people on your team that are different from you, have different personalities, someone who is going to tell you how things are, not be a yes man or woman. So kindly speak to how you perceive that if an alternative party candidate has the opportunity to pick their campaign. Oftentimes they have to take everyone who comes. But if they have the opportunity to pick their campaign, how would you advise them to pick people on their campaign?
Yeah, great question. I think you're 100% right that picking people with some opposing views from you is good. Honestly, it sounds corny, but one of my friends always puts it that it's when you're looking for a campaign manager, it's very similar to looking for a spouse, where you need somebody that is different from you in the ways that they'll pick up where you drop the ball and complement your weaknesses and keep things interesting and make sure that it's not just an echo chamber of a relationship, but you still need to pick a spouse that wants to live in a similar type of area, in a similar tax bracket with the similar amount of kids and similar life goals. You still need to be headed in the same direction in life. Those kinds of opposites don't attract, right? And I feel like it's very similar for the candidate campaign manager relationship. You need to agree on why you're running, like what the goals are, what your main messaging strategies are going to be, and the kind of overall makeup of what you want to do over the next year and a half. Those you need to be in agreement on. And if you're not, you're going to butt heads the whole time and nothing's going to get done. But as far as like personal strengths and weaknesses, you want somebody that's about as different from you as possible. That way, you can complement each other as much as possible and kind of pick up each other's slack.
Sounds smart. So
I will also mention on the topic of the candidate campaign manager, when the initial conversation, the candidate is hiring the campaign manager and they're interviewing them. Once the campaign manager is hired, contract is signed, they are the campaign manager, the candidate works for them. From there on out. That is the healthiest way I've seen campaign structured. The manager needs to manage, and he manages everything. He has the whole thing under him, and the candidate is just part of what he's managing. And like I said earlier, the candidate, his job is not to manage the campaign manager. It's to ask for votes and ask for money. And that's it.
Interesting. Sounds good. So can you tell our audience about your podcast?
Sure, yeah. I have a show that I started back in March of 2020 during the kind of first months of the lockdown. It's called Fite for Liberty, and every week I interview somebody that I think is out there fighting for liberty. It's spelled F-I-T-E, like my last name, so it's funny. Just somebody who I think is making the world a freer place, whether that's through politics and activism, through, business and entrepreneurialism, kind of creating a product that makes people's lives better, or if they're psychologists or something like that, just trying to help people live a freer life. It's a fairly broad spectrum of the definition of making the world a freer place. But sure. I try to talk to them and get kind of details about what it is that they actually do and how they got into it, and then get actionable advice on how my audience can do those similar things. So the goal of the show is for the audience to be able to watch an episode and hear somebody talk about something and say, that kind of sounds like something I'm good at and have kind of done somewhat in the past, but I never thought about using that for the movement and for liberty. And, now I have advice on how to reach out to somebody to get to volunteer on a campaign, what kinds of things I can do, what kind of skills I should be tweaking, and I know how to actually get into doing this task or this skill for liberty instead of just as a hobby.
Sure. Sounds good. So Fite for Liberty, it's called.
Yes.
All right. So in addition to the podcast, what other ways can our audience support you?
So you can find me on most social medias, I believe at Fite for Liberty or at David Fite. Twitter is at David the Fite because my old account got suspended, actually just a couple weeks ago. But you can check out all of those and definitely go subscribe to the YouTube. That's helpful. I'm trying to get monetized over there, so I need a couple more subscribers. Okay. I trust our audience members may listen to this, and then they might push you over the limit to get your monetization. All right. All right, David, thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing interesting information with our audience. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. All right, take care, and we wish you all the best in your personal and professional endeavors. Thanks. All right, bye now.